Some of you have ever seen the old metal fuse containers for your car, these tiny little fuses. I took a fuse container that had a sliding lid, made it big enough for her, soldered my sister's hair clip on it, and clipped it into my hair. But I had trained on this tower. I'd been up since about 6 in the morning training the bees in a series of steps to find the tower where they would find her. And then just before we began the filming, I'm crouched on the tower. They're flying everywhere. The bee is in my head. The queen is on my head. And as I move into the picture frame, they in turn find her by scent and then cover me. And there's nothing unusual about that. I'm sure you must have, as a child, seen this. People have made bee beards and things for centuries. There are very famous beekeepers.
It's quite a trick.
Yeah, ride the streets of London on horses with bee beards. So there's nothing singular about that choice.
It's no wonder that there are magicians and beekeepers. My father was actually a magician too. He did these tricks.
Yeah, and beekeepers, they're ones who play with clarinets and they make the beards, and it's a lot of this. It's sort of the intent of what you want to do.
Did you show her work?
No, I didn't have her work.
Whose work is that?
Hope Ginsburg, I mentioned, she did a project in New York where she
Really great artist.
She trained herself with a beekeeper to be able to have a bee beard.
Okay. So, and what was your other question?
Was this what you hoped for in the woods when you were done
with honey? That adolescent effort of mine in '73 with the tub of honey was a kind of deep relationship for me. That really, at essence, all of this work is about deepening the relationship, project by project, year by year, trying to create experiences that deepen this relationship to the hive and to nature. And so, the more communion or covering. I never quite imagined anything like that. But I just thought the bees would be wherever there was honey oozing down and would have a good time. And the event would last as long as there was food. So there'd be a kind of process that would take a number of hours. And this went way beyond anything I had initially imagined. And rather than covering the whole body and seeing some 25-year-old nude on a tower, I thought to place it at the point of consciousness, put everything in relationship to one life form coming to the center of awareness and perception, that most of everything is centered here, and then to obscure that. So then the piece began to mature with every year of experimentation and work. So that's where the philosophy and the notion of giving up oneself and obscuring oneself. And when you think of portraiture and you think of sculptural processes, this is well within the field of sculpture, in spite of what my mother said, that this notion of sculpting a bust and sending it through many forms, I'm just letting a living process be a part of that relationship and then giving up presence in the execution of that. Other thoughts on this project? Yeah, Anne?
I was wondering, you said you named your hives. Did you choose a specific hive to make this work with? Or, I mean, was it specific to, were you trying to have a relationship with that bees?
No, I've got, at that point I had maybe 30, 35 hives, each with different names. The film was very difficult to do, and it took many, many months where I had two wonderful friends, Reese Williams and Eric Bosler, show up every Saturday hoping it would work. And week after week, month after month, it kept failing. You know, there would be clouds moving by. That was not the pure space I wanted. There would be crows, and the bees would be stinging too much. The weather would turn bad. The camera would fail. Just about everything that happened, that could happen, did happen. And so then, in a very brief way, this is the danger of letting me talk or letting a beekeeper tell stories. The night before, a friend of mine, Randy Caldwell, who had a studio in Emeryville, she wanted her studio sheetrock. And so all of us, pitched in to help. You can't sheetrock without a tremendous amount of alcohol, because it's like one of the deadening tasks of humanity. And so we were sheetrocking and working our way through, and she tried to make it up to us by each getting haircuts. And so everybody who worked got a haircut as a thank you. And by the time they got to, they wanted me to have a haircut to be part of the communal spirit of that evening. So at 2 in the morning, I didn't want a haircut. And you can see, it wasn't one of my earlier forms, it looked like a Dutch boy, kind of a bowl cut. They held me to a rolling office chair and proceeded to whack away, and everybody was giggling and drinking, and I was half cooperating. My ear was cut in the process, so it was sort of a kind of evening of full debauchery. And at 4 in the morning, I was in my Peugeot. Reese Williams, who was one of the camera people, was facing me, window to window, front end to front end. He turned his headlights on first. I was completely collapsed on the steering wheel, and I was saying to myself, man, if you fucked up, you've got to be up in 2 hours to make this film, and you know that alcohol in your breath excites the bees, and you're more likely to be stung. That's assuming you can stay on the tower. And so everything was going, and Reese saw me just with my hands, and my head in my hands, and he kind of giggled and drove off. And then I limped home, got up at 6, and started preparing. They were coming at 10 or 11, and we started preparing. And it worked. For the first time, it worked. And so our philosophy after that was, you know, basically do everything wrong in terms of preparation, and somehow you turn some psychic corner in a process. And so I was hungover badly. I was trying not to wobble on the tower. I just hoped I wouldn't fall off the tower. So the high ecstatic communion was also tempered by a great deal of alcohol left over from the night before. So it was not without its odd problems. Okay, well let's keep going here. Things get a lot more complicated and politically, and then we'll see how I have as many of these as you have time for, but what I want to do is hit some fundamental bands. So now we're shifting from that first project.
Is that the haircut?
No, this is much later. This is 1989. This is a store-bought haircut. Let me start by, because I brought along, Allison said, why don't you bring these beat boxes into the conversation. So on the table there's 4 or 5 historical boxes, and I brought the box that is being used for the project in Berlin called A House Divided. And this in Berlin was the city as I found it. This was an exhibition in which they invited artists to work primarily in West Berlin, when it was still divided, at the Künstlerhaus Britannia, which was an old hospital that was right on the edge of the wall. And what I proposed was to look at these 2 cities as a house divided, and to try to work with honeybees in a way to find ways that you're symbolically or fully reunite these 2 cities through processes around beekeeping. So I made up these little bee hunting boxes, and we can pass this around. And in essence, it's a simple 2-chambered box with sliding covers and glass that allows light into each chamber. The top has a little sliding dovetail that allows light into that chamber. And there's a simple gate that connects the 2. And variations of this have been used for centuries, and I brought a few from the last, say, 70 or 80 years. And all there is to it, and the word all there is put in quotation marks, it's much slower than I'm going to give you the impression. So if we have, we'll just say this is a blooming flower, and honeybees are foraging over this. So what I wanted to do in Berlin was to capture honeybees both in East Berlin and West Berlin and track them back to an unknown nesting site to get 1 hive of bees and 200 pounds of beeswax for the exhibition site. It'll make more sense in a few moments. And so I had to find the beekeepers, I had to find the wild hives. So with bees foraging over this imaginary flower, you deftly, like when you were a kid with a bottle, a mason jar, you would deftly collect one of those, open this gate, open this, and the bees will always move to light. Light is the central guiding force of a hive, along with pheromones. So now we have 1 bee that's sort of angrily trapped inside. You close the gate, repeat the process over and over again until you have maybe a half dozen bees, all trapped into this chamber. Now it reverses. you take a little bit of honeycomb and you put just a